Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for coming along this afternoon. Workman Clark, it's quite poignant that we're talking about a Belfast shipyard this week. Workman Clark went out of business in 1935. The other yard managed to hold on for a few more years, but it too now looks like it's going the same way. Unfortunately, as Stephen has said, there are very few documentary records of Workman and Clark.
Excuse me, I hope the sound is really hearing.
Oh, sorry.
Take it closer to the microphone or switch it up a bit.
Is that better?
Raise your other one up.
This one's for recording.
That's better.
Can I turn up the volume?
Can do, but I think you probably, if you just talk closer to it.
Right. Okay, I'll try and talk closer in, but I'll probably move around. As Stephen said, there's not many records in the archive. And just 10 minutes ago, I was handed this book by a lady in the audience. And it is Samuel Corbett's record of ships that were constructed by Workman and Clark. It is it's phenomenal to have something like this in my hand. I mean, and this has nothing to do with my talk, but it is just, there's a whole batch here, 404 to 413, Admiralty repairs. Unfortunately, it doesn't give the ships, but that's probably because that information was deemed to be sensitive. I'm not going to go on about this too much. I want to later on maybe get it photographed for my posterity, but thank you very much for bringing that along. I begin to sound like somebody from the antiques room sort of thing. Anyway, let's get back to business. Okay, on the afternoon of Friday the 8th of August 1919, the afternoon, probably around about 2:30, the day before the Belfast Peace Parade, where 60,000 servicemen marched through the streets of our city, Sir Edward Carson unveiled a memorial commemorating the officers and men of the Belfast shipyard. And it was men who had died in the Great War. After the presentation, as Stephen said, you're welcome to join me down at the shipyard where we will have a very short commemoration, and it's literally going to be me reading out Sir Edward Carson's speech, word for word, and the reading of a poem and the binion. So let's move on. This is a photograph from, I think, it came to me via a young gentleman called Mr. Richard Graham, Esquire of Lisburn City. It's not known who built, or it's not known who designed the memorial. And this is the memorial here. It was built into the corner of the North Yard offices. It was embedded in. It was supposed to be there forever. Unfortunately, it wasn't. You can see how tall it was. It was probably about 10, 12 feet tall. It wasn't just a tablet. Carned & Wolfe Memorial consists of 3 brass tablets. Workman Clark built a monument. The only other industrial concern in Northern Ireland to have a monument as their war memorial is the Midland Railway Company, and that memorial was in the old York Street station. We do know that it was built by Purdy and Millard, who were monumental masons who were based in Howard Street in Belfast. And there were 2 elements within this memorial which were by Hollywood sculptress Sophia Rosamond Prager, whom some of you will have heard. These are 2 photographs, probably the 2 earliest photographs of the memorial. This was a photograph taken when on the day that the memorial was unveiled. If you look carefully down here, you can see it's blank. And if you get access to a good close-up photograph, if you look here, you can make out the letters of names that have been marked out but not engraved. They were in such a rush to get, because Sir Edward Carson was coming over for the peace parade, they wanted to have him to unveil it, and the stonemason hadn't quite finished the job. So he was told, pack up your gear, clear off, and come back next week and you can finish it. If you look at this side of this memorial, you can see there are names added here, there are names here that aren't here. So in late 1919, names have been added, but at two later stages, names have been added here, a further 14 names. So there's 122 names, including Edward Workman, on the memorial in August 1919. There's now 136. Following the demise of Workman Clark in 1935, Harland and Wolff took over the shipyard, and basically they asset stripped it, I think would be the phrase today. The memorial was retained in part. These panels here, the panels with the terracotta profile of Ted Workman and the names of the men were retained. They were flattened and they were put on the wall of the Pumphouse at Thompson Graving Dock. They're still there today. Badly eroded, but possibly more readable now than they ever have been in the past 30, 40 years. And we're going to go down and have a look at it. And you can look at the names. The lady that gave me that small book, the name in the book is Samuel Corbett. One of the men recorded on the war memorial has the surname Corbett. Whether it's a relative or not, we don't know. But it's, as we know that it was frequent for sons to follow their fathers into their father's job. If Samuel Corbett worked in the shipyard, it's very possible that either his siblings or his father or his sons also worked in the shipyard. So moving on, this is the memorial as it exists today. This photograph was taken by Mark Thompson, who just happened to be passing when the old perspex had been taken off, and he snapped off a few photographs, which is great because it enables us to see the names without any reflections. So it's a very good and it's a very high resolution image, and you can, if you blow it up on the computer screen, you can make out the names. As I said, Rosamund Prager sculpted the terracotta relief of Edward Workman, who was the only son of the firm's co-founder, and he was a director of the firm when he received his commission into the 5th Battalion Royal Irish Rifles on the 15th of August 1941. And just want to go back to these. These are the 3 Rosamund Prager panels which have gone missing. They are phenomenal pieces of work. These photographs were taken in 1919 at the unveiling of the memorial, and we have access to these via David Lindsay, the Lord Lieutenant of County Down, who is a direct descendant. The 3 relief panels were under the canopy of the memorial. The first panel depicts men at work in the shipyard, so you can see men with shoveling coal into a furnace, men with hammers and so forth. The second panel is a farewell, a leaving home, a marching off to war scene, where you've got soldiers on one side, and on the other side you've got the women and the children, the mothers, the lovers, the sweethearts, the wives of the men marching off. And the third panel depicts a battle scene where Ted Workman is being tended in a German trench by his comrades. He was to die of the wounds that are depicted in this relief panel. What's amazing to me is that this one fella here, you can make out his facial features. It was something that Rosamund Prager did frequently. She would take a subject that was connected to the organisation and use him as a model. So for example, the Campbell College War Memorial, Rosamund Prager did the statues, and she based the likenesses of the men depicted on those on 2 boys from the upper school and 2 boys from the junior school at Campbell. I think she took one of the apprentices in Workman Clark in 1918 or 1919 and used him as a model for that. As I said, the memorial commemorates 136 men from Workman Clark who died in the Great War. The youngest fatality was John Watson Graham from Bentinck Street, and he was serving on HMS Stonecrop when she was sunk by a German submarine U-43 on the 18th of September 1917 with the loss of 36 lives. John Graham Watson was 16 years old. The oldest fatality was William James McClune, who was 42 years old when he enlisted for war service in October 1914. He had previously served with the Royal Irish Rifles from 1888, serving in the South African Wars at the end of the 19th century, turn of the 20th century. He was serving with the Royal Irish Fusiliers when he was discharged due to illness on 16th May 1918, and he died of cardiac disease at Cumberland Street in the Shankill area on the 15th of August 1918. He was 45 years old when he died. He'd served in the army for 21 years, and he's buried in Belfast City Cemetery. The first Workman Clark employed to die on war service was William Warnock from Richmond Street, who was killed in action on the 26th of August 1914, 3 days after landing at Le Havre. He probably didn't even get much action in the front line, because by the time he would have got from from Le Havre to a frontline trench, he possibly was in a trench for 1 day before he got killed. He was 33 years old, and he died with the 2nd Battalion Royal Enniskilling Fusiliers. The last Workman Clark employee to die was Arthur McClelland from Southwell Street. He was serving with the Army Service Corps when he died of influenza and pneumonia on the 10th of November 1918, the day before the armistice, the day before the guns fell silent on the Western Front, although there was still fighting going on elsewhere. The armistice was not the end of the war. He died at 30th Casualty Clearing Station on 10th November, as I said. He was 29 years old, and he's buried in the Cambria East Military Cemetery in France. This is a close-up of the terracotta profile of Ted Workman. As I said, he received his commission on the 15th of August 1914, and he was posted on attachment to the 1st Battalion York and Lancaster Regiment on the 1st of May 1915. He was promoted to full lieutenant on 22nd May 1915 and was subsequently transferred to the 2nd Battalion Royal Irish Rifles in August 1915 and fought an engagement known as the 2nd Attack on Bellevarde in the Ypres salient. For his actions at Hooge, he was mentioned in Sir John French's dispatches in January 1916. On 19th January 1916, whilst commanding B Company of the 2nd Battalion Rifles, Edward Workman participated in an information gathering trench raid at the River Leash near Armentières. Whilst holding prisoners at pistol point in the German trenches, he was hit in the head by a rifle butt and knocked to the ground. He recovered sufficiently and was able to lead his men and prisoners back to their own trenches. One of his men reported that Workman, though wounded, kept giving orders under the strain of the retaliatory bombardment, which lasted for half an hour, at the end of which time we were relieved and Workman went off to hospital. Probably taken off to hospital would be a better term. He was taken to the Duchess of Westminster Hospital at Le Touquet, but developed a severe infection which led to his death from meningitis exactly 1 week after he was wounded. His father, mother, sister and brother-in-law, Captain David Cecil Lindsay of the 17th Battalion Rifles, had travelled to France to be by his side. He was awarded the Military Cross for his actions in that raid, with the citation being published in the London Gazette on the 14th of March 1916 for conspicuous gallantry under heavy shell fire during an attack. He organised and rallied attacking parties, and although wounded himself, continued with great coolness to direct operations. Edward Workman died of his wounds on the 26th of January 1916 at the age of 29. He was buried in the Camier Road Military Cemetery at Etaples, and that cemetery by the end of 1918 had been renamed as the Etaples Military Cemetery. Workman Clark's wartime service did not end with men going off to the field of battle or going off to join the Navy. Commercial and industrial concerns across the United Kingdom encouraged their employees to go off to war, often promising to keep their jobs open for them should they return. However, the government was aware that men employed in industries that were vital to the war service could not be released, and so the on-war service badge was introduced, and this was given to men who were working in key industries on the war effort: the shipyards, dock workers who were unloading and loading ships that were bringing in supplies, men who worked in the heavy engineering industries like Sirocco Works. Not that you worked in the Sirocco Works, you didn't look old enough, did you?
No, but I've seen Sir Samuel Davidson's war service 1915. I've seen a photograph of it in Bangor.
Right. The man at the front here is a Sirocco Works Anorak, I think.
Wow.
But also Mackies, men who worked in Mackies, who couldn't go off to war or were held back from going off to war. They would have worn one of these badges. Why? So that if they were on the streets, people wouldn't come up to them and call them shirkers, or call them cowards, or call them traitors. They were doing war service, and in many respects it was just as vital service as the service on the Western Front, or in Gallipoli, or in Mesopotamia, or in German East Africa. Wasn't all on the Western Front. They also received a certificate with the badge number, so they could show that they could prove that they had the entitlement to wear that badge. During the war period, Workman Clark was involved in the building, repairing or overhauling of 1,396 ships. These included battle cruisers, patrol boats, boom defences, converting stately liners into hospital ships or troop ships, and converting cargo vessels into armed merchant cruisers. By the end of 1915, newspapers reported that 2,000 men from Workman Clark had gone off to war. Many of those would have been volunteers. Some of them would have been men who were brought back in from the reserves. So men who had served in the army, they were in the army reserve, and on the outbreak of war they were brought back into full service. Also, by the end of 1915, 25% of the contracts held by Workman and Clark were war related, and they had moved into also doing armaments. So they weren't just working on ships, they were also working on armaments and munitions. This is one of the ships, one of the what we would now, I suppose, call a cruise liner. Although to my mind, this is a lot nicer than a lot of the cruise liners you see nowadays. They often strike me as being more divers on sea than a cruise liner. But that's just my opinion. This is the SS Otranto, which was built at Workman and Clark in 1909. It was built whilst the Titanic was being built. It lasted a wee bit longer. It was built for the UK-Australia route, and she made her maiden voyage in October 1909. She was commissioned into the Royal Navy in August 1914 and saw action at the Battle of Coronel off the coast of Chile in November 1914, and also in the Battle of the Falklands the following month. In 1918 she was converted to become a troop ship. In October 1918, Otranto was part of a convoy bringing American troops over to Europe. She collided with HMS Kashmir in the North Channel between Ulster and southwest Scotland and sank. There was quite a heavy loss of life. A lot of American soldiers died, and the rescued Americans were brought to Belfast. However, 21 of those Americans subsequently died, and they were buried in Belfast City Cemetery. If you go up to Belfast City Cemetery and you go to the Cross of Sacrifice, there are now two rows of Commonwealth War Graves headstones from the Second World War. That's where the American soldiers were buried. They were later disinterred or exhumed and either repatriated to the United States or reburied in the American Military Cemetery in London. So it's another aspect of the war service, and it's also something where that particular episode, Belfast threw its arms open to the American soldiers who had survived the sinking of Otranto. And quite ironically, an officer with the American Red Cross was sent from London over to Belfast to minister to the spiritual needs of the soldiers who had survived. He was from Belfast. He was a member of Newton Breda Presbyterian Church. Us Presbyterians get everywhere. Now, shipyards had also been a very dangerous place to work. Back in those days, you didn't have health and safety. You didn't have regulations or strict regulations. For example, during the building of RMS Titanic, 13 boys and men died in accidents in Harland and Wolff. And it would be no different in the Great War. Between August 1914 and the end of 1918, at least 22 workers died as a result of accidents in the Workman Clark shipyards. The youngest was 14, and 2 men died at the age of 53, working on ships. It's not clear whether they were working on ships that were part of the war effort or working on ships from a commercial basis. George Lilly from D Street, literally a mile from here, was a shipwright at Workman Clark and died at the Royal Victoria Hospital on the 2nd of February 1918 after falling 33 feet. At the inquest in Belfast City Hall, the jury suggested that he had not received sufficient warning when about to heave a frame. George Lilly was a sailor when he married Margaret Saunders on 8th August 1882 at St Anne's Parish Church in Belfast. They had 12 children. Only 3 of them survived to 1911. George Lilly was 53 when he died, and he's buried in an unmarked grave in Dundonald Cemetery. This is Andrew Patton, who had a bit of a checkered history in the war. He was the son of John and Elizabeth Patton and was living at Dock Street when he married Margaret McClenaghan of Nelson Street at St Anne's Parish Church on the 15th of April 1911. Andrew Patton was a holder-up and was living at Saunders Street when he enlisted with the Royal Irish Rifles on 10th December 1914. He enlisted with the 8th Battalion. His attestation papers recorded that he had tattoos of King Edward, though it doesn't say which one, Queen Alexandra, and of course, King William III. I think we can safely assume that he was a Protestant. Whilst undergoing basic training at Ballycougar Camp with the 8th Battalion, Andrew Patton stabbed Rifleman Burton. That's what you get when you take men from the East into the army. He was charged with assault occasioning actual bodily harm, and he received 2 months' imprisonment with hard labour. On being released, he was thrown out of the Royal Irish Rifles. What did he do? He joined up again with the Lancashire Fusiliers. He was wounded, he was awarded the Military Medal, and he survived the war and returned to work in the shipyard. During a period of communal violence in the Ballymacard area, just 12 days So I've missed out a bit. Anyway, during a period of communal violence in Ballymccartney, Andrew Patton was shot at Pitt Street whilst he was on his way to work. He survives 4 years of hell on the Western Front, and he's got his peace. Maybe had a newspaper. You've got to have something to do when you're in the toilet. And he goes off to work, and he gets shot, and he dies in the Royal Victoria Hospital on the 23rd of November 1921 at the age of 32. Workman Clark held a Remembrance Day service at the War Memorial at the North Yard every year in the early years of the 1920s. It's probable that Andrew Patton on the 11th of November was at the Remembrance service when they were reading out the names of his comrades and colleagues who had died in the war. 12 days later, he's dead. He's buried in Dundonald Cemetery. He was buried there on the 26th of November 1921. And he was survived by his widow and 4 children. That's his headstone in Dundonald Cemetery. And if you want a tour of Dundonald Cemetery, I can recommend an expert. This is John Ernest Corbett. He was born on the 23rd of May 1890 at D Street in Ballymccartney to Francis Corbett, a riveter, and Sarah Patterson, and they had 11 children, only 8 of whom survived to 1911. So we can see here Francis Corbett was a riveter in the shipyard. John Ernest Corbett works in Workman Clark. Samuel Corbett, who I mentioned earlier, whose book this is, worked at Workman Clark. They're probably all related. The family belonged to the Congregational denomination and lived at Nevis Avenue in 1901 before moving to Bloomfield Avenue by 1911. Like his father and his elder brother, Samuel Corbett, John was a riveter and was employed at Workman Clark. This is the work record book of the brother of this man. I am 99% certain of that. How does that grab you? Running up with emotion, I think. Pardon me. In 1911 he was lodging with the MacDonald family at St Leonard Street, but gave his address as 4 Bloomfield Avenue when he signed the Ulster Covenant at Mount Pottinger Orange Hall. John enlisted with the Royal Irish Rifles on the 25th September 1914 and was posted to the 8th Battalion. He was deployed to France with the Ulster Division in October 1915, and on 15th July 1916 the Northern Whig reported that Rifleman Corbett had been badly wounded, necessitating the amputation of his left arm. Now, you wouldn't be able to drive in many rivets with only one arm. John married Elizabeth Patterson of Rosebery Street, on 12th October 1916 at Belmont Presbyterian Church. He was discharged from the army with Silver War Badge on 5th February 1917. The Silver War Badge was a badge that was given to men who were discharged due to illness or wounds. Again, a bit like the on-war service badge, so they would not be considered to be shirkers or conscientious objectors. John and Elizabeth, their only child, Sarah Jane, was born on the 29th of July 1918. And John's wife died of pulmonary tuberculosis and asthenia at 4 Bloomfield Avenue on the 24th of June 1919 at the age of 27, both being buried in Dundonald Cemetery. The disability pension awarded to John Corbett was initially set at 100%, 40 shillings a week, but was reduced to 80%, 32 shillings a week, in February 1920, and to 70%, 28 shillings a week, in August 1920. When the final payment was made on the 5th 15th of December 1922, he received 40 shillings. That would be the equivalent of £108. So the disability pension for losing an arm in the war was round about £100 per week. Nowadays, if we're looking at nowadays terms. Two sons of Jasper Payne Gammon and Adeline Agnes Hunter of Harper Street in the Pottinger area were employed in Workman Clark and served during the Great War. Both sons had also been members of the East Belfast Regiment UVF, and one of the sons had signed the Ulster Covenant in the lecture hall at Magain Memorial Presbyterian Church, which is on the Newtonards Road. Jasper Payne Gammon Jr. was born on 8th May 1896 and was a fitter in the yard. And he enlisted with the 8th Battalion Royal Irish Rifles on 7th September 1914. He was deployed to France in October 1915 with the Ulster Division and was injured during the opening days of the 1916 battles of the Somme. Medical records show that he had received gunshot wounds to the upper extremities and a compound fracture. 4th July he was transferred to the No. 3 Northern General Hospital at Le Treport. Rifleman Jasper Gammon was discharged due to his wounds on the 19th July 1919, again with Silver War Badge. He received a 40% disability pension for gunshot wounds to the right arm at a weekly rate of 16 shillings per week. His brother was born on 24th December 1893 and was a carpenter in the yard. He enlisted with the Royal Engineers on 7th January 1915 and was deployed to France with the 150th Field Company, which was also part of the Ulster Division. He was admitted to the 110th Field Ambulance, suffering from shell shock and wounds on the 28th of June 1916 and transferred to a base depot on the 4th of July. So both brothers were transferred to hospitals with wounds on the same day. Different hospitals, but same day. He rejoined his unit on the 26th of July, but was hospitalised again on 23rd January 1917 for 10 days, and from 8th August to 17th December 1917. After this extended period of treatment, he was discharged to a base depot at Bologna and subsequently transferred to the 554th Army Troops based in the Ypres salient on the 1st of January 1918. These Army troop companies operated well behind the lines, and they were involved in more of the heavy construction, building roads, railways and so forth, water supply. Sapper William Hunter Gammon was dispatched to the UK for demobilisation on the 24th of February 1919 and was transferred to the Class Z Reserve on the 25th of March 1919. I think I've got my notes out of order. Oh well. I'm going to skip him. We'll go on to HMS Hawk. 4 men commemorated on the Workman Clark Memorial lost their lives on the 15th October 1914 when HMS Hawk was sunk by a German submarine U-19 in the North Sea. The submarine's first torpedo ignited a magazine and caused an explosion which ripped much of the ship apart. Hawk sank in a few minutes with the loss of 524 lives, including at least 49 Ulstermen. Only 74 men from the ship's crew survived. 6 of them were Ulstermen. The Hawk fatalities are commemorated on the Chatham Naval Memorial in England, and 2 Workman Clark employees lost their lives on HMS Hawk from East Belfast. Robert John Hamilton was born on 10th July 1889 at Blythe Street, and that's in the Sandy Row area over in South Belfast. His father was Joseph Hamilton and his mother was Sarah McKinley, and he was one of their 12 children. His father was a joiner in the shipyard, or in a shipyard, and the family had moved to Mersey Street by 1901. Robert was a labourer when he joined the Royal Navy on the 9th of April 1907. being transferred to the Royal Fleet Reserve on the 14th of April 1912. When you joined the Navy in those days, you joined up usually for a 12-year period, 5 years on active service and 7 years in the reserve. So when war broke out, he was halfway through his 7-year period in the reserve. He was recalled on the 5th of August 1914 and joined HMS Hawke as a stoker. He was 25 years old when he died. I'm going to finish off with one that has particular interest to me. Not because I am a relative, not because I know much about him, not because I have a newspaper photograph of him, because I don't. David John Mccarron was born on the 12th September 1878 at Frank Place to David John Mccarron and Sarah Ann Graydon Thompson, who had been married at Willowfield Parish Church on the 28th of February 1873. His mother died of deep vein thrombosis at the family home on 4th Street on 29th December 1887 at the age of 36. The family was living at Brussels Street when his father remarried, and he married another woman called Thompson, but they weren't related. They married in St Anne's Parish Church on the 15th March 1891. His father died of dropsy on 17th March 1899 at Snugville Street, and David John Mccarron was living at Rugby Street in what we would now term the University District when he married Sarah McGrath of Foxglove Street on the 24th of March 1902. They married at St Anne's Parish Church and they had one child, Maria McCarron, born on 27th June 1903 at number 24 Frankfort Street. David John Mccarron enlisted with the 6th Inniskilling Dragoons and was deployed to the Western Front with the Ulster Division in October 1915. He contracted illness, or the war service aggravated an existing heart condition, and he started coughing up blood. He was sent back to England for treatment. He was sent back to Belfast, where he, while still technically and officially a member of the army, he returned to his job at the shipyard. After another period of illness where he was again coughing up blood, he was discharged due to illness on 4th April 1918. He died of heart disease at Athens Street on 4th July 1918 and was buried, when these notes were written, he was buried in an unmarked plot in Dundonald Cemetery. Through the actions of Peter McCabe, who's sitting at the back trying to not look embarrassed, a cross was made for the family, and that cross has been established installed at his grave. But I hope that that's a temporary measure. Why? The surviving service papers for David John Mccarron record clearly that he was discharged due to illness that was aggravated by his war service. Consequently, he should be classified as an official Commonwealth War Graves fatality. He's not. His name is not in the Commonwealth War Graves database. Evidence has been submitted to the relevant authorities. As in the course of researching these men, I uncovered the details and have now been able to put together a case which has been submitted to the relevant authorities, and I am very confident that he will be accepted as an official war fatality and that he will receive a Commonwealth War Graves headstone in due course. Might take a couple of years. I had hoped that I would get an announcement from the authorities this week. It would have been fantastic to be able to stand here today and say, and just yesterday I got a letter. But I didn't, so I'm not going to do that. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you found it interesting. We are going to go down to